Hello, everyone. We're back with another episode of Novelists Unwind, and my special guest today is Dr. Byran Litfin. So excited to have you today to talk about your latest book. Thank you. Thank you for coming on.
Glad to be here, Johnny. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. And before the show, we said we wanted to talk first about Brian's background. There, you can see it. It's the Catacombs. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, my background, not my writing background or my academic background or something, but the what's behind me. I'm not actually here in the catacombs, but yeah, that's what this is. These are the burial grounds of the early Christians. They would take their deceased down below ground and keep the bodies in grave niches that they had there, and would sometimes come down and commemorate and remember those who had gone on, of course, with the hope and the belief that there would be a resurrection in Christ. And so the artwork is a way of conveying that there's a sense of hope and optimism that through Christ, they would have eternal life and that deceased person would live again someday. So it's one of the most important places in Christian history here are these ancient catacombs.
That's great. That sounds fun. Have you visited the catacombs? Have you been able?
Sure. Yeah, several times, and you can go down. You can even have a Lord's Supper down there and worship and remember those who have run the race before you, and it's a really moving time. So, somebody ever gets a chance to take a trip to Rome, be sure to hit the Christian catacombs of the ancient church.
Oh, wow. Well, you mentioned your academic background, and it really is important to the novel that you've written and that we're going to be talking about, The Conqueror. It's the first book in the Constantine Empire series. Tell us about how your academic background and your novel writing sort of all come together.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, kind of what you see behind me and what's the context of the historical novel is the field that I study, which is the ancient church, the church fathers and church mothers who were our forerunners in the faith. So you're talking about kind of the first in church history, maybe the first 500 years, like from the time of the apostles 500 years forward. That was the ancient period. And there's many great important stories that are part of that, and many moments that are pivotal when church history sort of makes a change into something important that affects us still today. And so, yeah, that history, which I've studied in a historical way and in a sort of academic way, is also the background of The Conqueror and the three books that you mentioned.
I love too that you've traveled quite a bit. So, you say that really too has just informed your research, that you didn't have to just look things up on Google.
Right. Yeah, no, that's true. And I think in any case where somebody is writing a novel, they say, write what you know.
Yeah.
And this is what I know. I wouldn't try to write a Western novel or prairie novel or Amish novel or something like that, because it's not really the world that I know. But this is what I know, as you said, even in kind of a firsthand way. And I would travel for many years. I was a professor and I would take students on study abroad tours. And so one of the fun things to do was, like I mentioned, you have a Lord's Supper down here, but to actually lead one with students and to hear their singing echoing in these underground chambers, or take them to Rome. And I used to, take them as they'd step off the subway and they'd come out from the subway station, they'd look up and there's the Colosseum, and their eyes would get big and sort of be amazed at that. And so, yeah, the travels are part of this discovery that's so exciting to me, and I love to share it with people. And that's what I'm doing in these stories, is just sharing my love for these lands with the reader as well.
Yeah. Well, show us a copy of your book. Now, because of the background that we've got up there,
Yeah.
It might be a little bit hard to see the whole.
I know. I should probably come home from the catacombs and but then you'd see that I'm just sitting in a boring guest bedroom at my house, It's like not as much fun, but I think I can show it to you. I mean, it's got kind of, as soon as I take it up into the background, it doesn't quite want to. The Conqueror.
The Conqueror, and it's a great cover. And I also watched the trailer that's on your website, and it's pretty cool. So
yeah, it's. I mean, the trailer fits and the cover fits. I mean, you got this guy and he's strong. He's got a sword and he's the conqueror and he's the hero of the story. And the trailer as well has this kind of big epic feel, and that's what these books are. And this first one is, which is it's war and it's excitement, it's drama, it's battles, it's rescuing, it's a strong masculine hero and a beautiful feminine heroine, and together they bring down the colossal bad guy with giant stakes, or the Roman Empire at stake, and the fate of the Christian church at stake, and the pivot of church history that's happening in the moment that they live, with an epic landscape. I know I'm using a lot of big adjectives here, aren't
No,
I?
I love
It's like just described, like the Iliad or the Odyssey or something like that. But it's in that tradition, like I think of this story, like as best as I can do it, is standing in the tradition of those great stories and epics like Ivanhoe and the Arthur romances and Greek literature, and all the great stories and novels, Three Musketeers and the swashbuckling. So I don't claim to be like that kind of a person, but I try to write with those epic stories in mind, if that makes sense.
It does, and I think I read that you don't really even consider this a series, but more of a saga after you get all 3 books written. That's
Yeah, it's 3 books. I mean, I don't think it won't go more than 3, and three's good. I mean, the 3-act structure, so one big story, 1, 2, 3, it works. But yeah, it's a saga in the sense that even in 3 books, you're covering so much of a sweep of maybe a total of a decade of time with the characters, and the novels are 500 words. Sorry, 500 pages,
wow,
180,000 words. I mean, they're big, thick,
that's big.
heavy duty novels, and so in that sense, 1, 2, 3 together will make something like a saga more than just a short trilogy or something like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. I was also reading like the front part of your book, so it's really interesting that you have this kind of overview and this glossary and all this information. And this isn't a time of history that I know very well, and I was so interested in why it is so important. I mean, even that one of the most pivotal eras in our history is this time period.
Yeah.
I was intrigued by the divisions, and then how Constantine was bringing everybody together through war, of
Mhm.
course. But can you
Yep.
talk about like what was going on, what the political situation was at that time?
Yeah. So when you think of, well, first of all, when you think of like early church novels, you might picture that that's happening in the time of the Book of Acts,
Right.
or the time with the apostles. And I do want to say it's not that. So it's not the biblical period in the Book of Acts and the New Testament, which is the 1st century.
Mhm.
So of course Christianity continues on in the Roman Empire past those years into the 1st century, the 2nd century, the 3rd century, into the 4th century, which is the 300s AD, 300 years after the birth of Christ. And so in that time frame, a you have a Roman emperor, but actually it had kind of been divided into 4. They call it the Tetrarchy. We call it the Tetrarchy. And so these 4 emperors are kind of supposedly cooperating, but actually there's a lot of competition and civil war. And so that's part of the historical background. But then in terms of church history, where there's a pivot, is that one of these emperors is Emperor Constantine. And unlike all the others, or most of the others that have ever existed, like from Nero forward, where they were hostile to Christians and wanted to persecute, or at least could potentially have done that, and often did do it, Constantine decides, not only I want to support these Christians, but I actually convert. At some point in his life, he converts and becomes the first Christian emperor. And so that's what's pivotal in church history, is that you're in the era where as people think, throw them to the lions, the Christians in the Colosseum, and they're being killed, persecuted, martyrs. That is coming to an end, and you're getting the beginning of Christendom, where the government actually supports the Christian faith institutionally. So major pivot point right there, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I really was interested in that too, and the difference between the Augustus and the Caesar, because we hear the
Mhm.
term Augustus Caesar all the
Yeah.
time, that there really was a distinction between what those two
Yeah,
meant.
by then there was. I mean, so kind of early on, like the first Roman emperor, that he's called Caesar Augustus. Well, those are both titles. There
Right.
aren't his names. Those are some of the many titles that he had. His name was Octavian. But so what happens is that 2 titles that one person could have kind of become split out, where the top 2 figures are called an Augustus, and then underneath them are 2 Caesars. and together you have four. So they've taken old traditional terminology and kind of spun it to mean something new in the 4th century.
I was interested too in what you had to say about these being small c Catholic Christians. So it's not the Roman Catholics that we think of. It's not Protestant Christians, and it's not Christians wearing togas.
Right, right, right. I try to avoid that. I mean, I really don't want to have the characters think and act like modern evangelicals would. You know, it's like, you're like, oh, if you just put a little toga on and some green leaves in their hair, but they would just be the same as, you know, an evangelical Christian today. It's like Billy Graham, but back then. But no, you have to be historically real. On the other hand, you don't go back to the 4th century and expect to find, you know, the Roman Catholic Church the way, say, like even like a Martin Luther knew it, or that we know it today, with this fully developed theology of the Pope and all of this kind of stuff. It's before that. So that's why I use the term little c Catholic, where Catholic is this really good and valuable word, not meaning the institution per se, but meaning universal, the whole unified church. But I will say, Johnny, that this is a book that I think evangelical readers, they get that and they can understand that. I actually think Roman Catholic readers would read it too and say, oh, I identify with those things. And evangelicals will say, well, I identify with those things. And it's sort of before we've become split into anything later. There was just one Christian church that was worshiping the risen Christ. The living water is shown over my shoulder here.
Yeah. Before all the traditions started piling on.
Yeah, yeah. And you can see the beginnings of the traditions, but they haven't become what they are today. Yes, it's a more pristine time, you might say.
So how does an academic, and obviously, I mean, you're well educated, you have, you know, your doctorate, was it a Master of Theology or an MDiv also?
In historical theology.
Yeah. How did your brain turn from all that, you know, theology, scholarly writing to, I'm going to start making things up.
Yeah. Well, you know what happened there? I mean, part of it is you're not totally making things up, but you can't have a historical novel. It's partly made up and partly real, so that helps. But you know what that experience was like, actually, was just going back to my youth, really. Because what happens is when you're a kid, you're very creative and you make stories, and I just love that kind of stuff. And I used to live in England, and so I would always, you know, go to castles and visit. And I even lived on J.R.R. Tolkien Street for a time.
Oh my
and read the Hobbit adventures. So you love all that stuff.
Yes.
And then you go to college and then grad school, and like you said, it kind of forces you into a different mode of discourse and writing. So what you have to do is find your inner child, I guess. But unlike children's work, where they don't actually have all the knowledge in place, now you've got the knowledge in place. So you have the enjoyment and creativity of a child and the knowledge base of an expert. And hopefully those things come together and create a really good story. At least that's what I've tried to do.
I love that. I really do. And especially, you know, showing that you obviously with this book and this series have taken that. You've taken all these experiences, what you're an expert in, and come up with a great story.
Yeah, I tried to.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. I'm glad you mentioned Tolkien, because I was also going to bring him up. I read your blog on Man Up, I think it was called.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and it's based on Tolkien's characters in Lord of the Rings. And just real briefly touch on that.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, I'm a Tolkien fan. Like I said, I discovered Tolkien in his home city of Oxford. I was living on his street for a time. I got my first Hobbit, you know, I was like, what's this book? And I brought it home and read it in a day, living in Oxford. So I was 12 or thereabouts. So I'm a fan for sure. And the Man Up blog, which is on my website, which is just my name.com, ByranLitfin.com, Bryan with a Y. Is looking at his different figures and how I think Tolkien really together all of his characters display a full picture of manhood. So you have self-sacrifice, you have friendship, you have artistic skill, you have celebration and feasting, you have bravery, you have all the different things that go into being a man. And Tolkien did a great job portraying the different parts of manhood in his Lord of the Rings saga.
He did. And I really was appreciative of what you had to say about Legolas in that article, because, and we're getting way off topic here, but,
No, it's fine.
but who cares?
It's fine. Where do you want to go?
It's fun. Because I've read The Lord of the Rings, I think twice, maybe 3 times, but yet the movie is what, is in everybody's heads because we've seen it hundreds of times, dozens of times at least. And I think Legolas character got a little bit of short shrift in the movie, so it was really fun to read that you called him, I'm gonna mess it up now what you called him, but I loved it. But
like a beauty maker.
Beauty maker, right.
Someone that not just through music, I mean, he was skillful with music, but even his clothing and his self comportment was attractive, and his gear was functional in a good and attractive way. And he made art, and he called attention to nature, which is such an important part of manhood, I think, is to sort of be a person of the natural world and not just the business office or something. And so Legolas is he's a little bit of a pretty boy in the movies, but the Legolas that Tolkien created was someone you'd want to hang out with, but you'd be intimidated by too. Sure. And he would point you to the beauty that you were missing all around you.
Yeah, I really love that. That resonated with me, so that was pretty cool. So going back to your writing journey, what started first? Agent, writers conferences, what's your story?
Well, my story, probably unlike some novelists, mine is wrapped up with the academic world happening first. And that once you get past your grad school, which I did 9 years of graduate work. So once you're past that, the writing door opens to you. In fact, you have to, as they say in academia, publish or perish. But you're publishing, articles in journals that only other scholars read, or you're presenting at conferences relating to very narrow things, or some of what I did. And so this is possible too, which is to publish like nonfiction, history or something like that, but more popular. Like I wrote a book called Getting to Know the Church Fathers. So the kinds of ancient figures that are over my shoulder here, the catacombs and so forth, who were they for Christians that don't have any background in that? And so I wrote a book on that, or I wrote a book on the ancient martyrs, or I wrote a book on the apostles. And we all know what happened in the book of Acts. Right. Where did they go next? All these traditions, are they true? Did Thomas go to India? Is that even real? Did Peter get crucified upside down? What's up? So that's a kind of writing that is not for other professors per se. It's based on that knowledge base, but it's for the church to edify. And so from there, I guess fiction was the next step. It's not the inevitable step because not everybody does it, but the door opened for me to do that with a previous trilogy that I did with Crossway. And I think that laid the foundation for the one that is coming out now with Ravel, which is the Conqueror and the 2 after it.
Yeah. Wow. So what is the book after this one? This one's the Conqueror. And then what's next?
Yeah, well, so the next one is called Every Knee Shall Bow. We just kind of officially agreed upon the title. And so you're the first to know that publicly, actually. So you got the scoop. And I never have put that out there. But it's called Every Knee Shall Bow. This one will be much more the story in some ways of the heroine. In other words, I mean, the hero is there too, just as much. But it's got a bit of a feminine journey aspect to it. But it's still a very rugged kind of masculine type of book, which is really what I'm doing in these 3 books. And these are books that dudes would read and enjoy. So yeah, it's the continuation of the story of Rex and Flavia and kind of what they do next. And the history that is in this one is just the beginning of the important historical things that happen afterwards. So I just take them through the next colossal events that unfold in their lifetime.
Would you say you're more a pantser or a planner with this, especially a series that's so big and such
total planner.
Total planner.
Like this, like Jerry Jenkins, I know him because he's connected to Moody where I work, and Jerry's kind of the classic pantser. I think maybe he came up with that term or whatever. But and so for those that don't know, it's just like, hey, the seat of your pants. Like you just, there's a blank cursor and you make some characters and you just find out what happens as you write a story. No way. This novel that I just mentioned, the second one, Every Knee Shall Bow, is going to be, as I said, about 180,000 word novel. But the document that I have that is the notes and the here's what's going to happen scene by scene and put this in and make this happen and this relates to that and here's a picture, make it happen this way, is about 40,000 words. Like that's my outline. That's my notes. That's big enough to be a novel by itself.
Sure
It's just
is.
messy notes.
Yeah.
So I am not a pantser. I'm a planner. As anybody is who like has written a PhD dissertation, you can't pants that either.
No, you can't.
You have to
No.
plan it out. I guess I just learned to do it that way, and that's the only way I know to do, whether fiction or nonfiction.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to do it. I started out more as a pantser, but the more books I write, the more I go towards more planning. It just makes it life easier.
Well, don't you find that if you pants it, you write yourself into dead ends?
Oh, yes.
And you have to unravel them because you didn't realize where that was going to go. But now actually I killed the plot line that I should have seen that was going to happen.
Right.
And you don't have as good a sense of foreshadowing because you don't know what's coming next. So you can't foreshadow it in an early scene. Whereas if you do have it planned, you're like, oh, this scene will be a perfect like echo either forward to show what is going to happen or to have that same theme, or remember when that happened? Well, this is, so when you're just pantsing.
A lot more rewriting and pantsing.
Yeah. And I don't want to do that. I just want to like start and go,
Go. Well, again, like I started, I read the prologue and it was just gripping. Immediately you're just drawn to this young boy character. No spoilers, but do you want to just talk about the prologue and how the story begins? Because it was just like, oh, wow, this is tremendous.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it. And the main character, is this guy here. And the prologue, he's young, he's a boy, so it's sort of like foreshadowing, but it's not really a boy's story. I mean, he's a late teen, young adult, kind of in the Roman Empire would be considered an adult, which would be about 18. And then he goes through the 3 books. He goes on into eventually into his 30s. But what did you ask? Just kind of the prologue and.
Just talk about the prologue for just a second.
Yeah. So the prologue is where you kind of launch the character, and you even say a little something about his personality. And so he's this boy who's in like a street yard brawl. And he ends up like choking the son of a centurion to death. And Constantine is kind of there, and he's kind of seeing like, what have you done, boy? And Rex is this. He's Germanic, so he's not of the Roman people, but he's of the Germanic tribes, which often were coming into the Roman army at this time. They were very often recruited to be soldiers, these Germans. And so the emperor is like, "What did you do? That's the death penalty." He kind of threatens him, and Rex is like, "Well, give me a sword and see if you can take me." And you just threatened the emperor, but Constantine says, "I like this kid. Anybody who's got the guts, you'd make a great special forces operative. Let's get you trained up." And so it launches him into the story where he becomes a Roman special forces agent, I guess you'd say.
Oh, that's so cool. That's so cool. Well, this has been wonderful. And I have one last question. It's what I ask all my guests. When you're all done writing the book, what do you do to unwind?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I do like to travel. I mean, I can't go to Italy right now, which is a shame because it's like I'm just craving an espresso on the coast of the Mediterranean, So I've been traveling some, just as much as I can in the United States, which we have a beautiful country and there's much to see. So I just like to break out of my box and see the mountains, whether it's the Smoky Mountains or the Rocky Mountains or whatever. And then I come back and I'm all energized and ready to.
There you go.
Ready to write.
Yeah. Well, Bryan, thank you so much. This has just been fascinating. It's been like a great ride through history and literature.
Good. Well, the story is a great ride, so I hope people enjoy it in that at that level.
Maybe
It's a journey and adventure. But thank you for having me. It's been
Oh,
great.
so glad to have you. Thank you very much. And thanks everybody for watching. See you again on another episode of Novelists Unwind. Bye-bye.